So I was looking for some excuses to write some bash scripts with loops, just to sort of have some various uh, demos of loops in bash. And I have a student who's sort of obsessed with the Collets conjecture. So I thought I'd write some small little bash scripts to um, play around with Collets. So the Collets conjecture says you start with some number, and if that number is even, then you divide it by 2. And if that number is odd, you will multiply by 3 and then add 1. And then you just repeat this procedure. And the conjecture is that you will always end up at 1. This, if you keep applying this process, you're going to get down to 1. So that is the idea. So here's my first little bash script, echoing for the user to enter some number and reading it in. And I'm going to say that while that number is greater than 1, I'm going to assume it's positive. I didn't do any checking, but I assume while that number is greater than 1, I'm going to enter this loop and stay in this loop while the number is greater than 1. And I'm going to, remember in bash, you use the word let to make sure the math gets done. And so I'm preparing something I'm just calling REM for remainder, and I'm taking n and dividing it by 2. So when I'm doing a calculation, when I'm getting the value of a variable, I put a $sign in front. When I'm assigning it, I don't. So the rem here has no $sign, but the n does. I want the value of 2. I'm going to divide by 2 and take the remainder or the modulus, and then assign that to remainder, rem. And then I'm going to ask if, and here's my $sign back because I'm using its value now. If my value is equal to 0, so we do like GTs and LTs and EQs and such like that in bash. So I'm asking if the remainder is equal to 0, then it's even. So I'm printing out, then it's even. So I'm just writing out the instructions here. So divide by 2, and then I'm dividing by the 2. Otherwise, I'm saying it's odd, and so I'm going to multiply by 3 and add 1. So there it is, multiply n, $sign n by 3 and add 1, make it the new n. And then just keep repeating. So that is my first version of this. And so here I am in my command line. I'm going to run bash the Collatz script. And I'm going to enter some number, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 7, why not? And then it just has this sort of repeating thing of, there it was. It was odd, so I multiplied by 3. Then it was even, so I divided by 2. Then it was odd, so I multiplied by 3 and added 1. And then it was even, and back and forth and back and forth. What it did indeed end up, 2 is even, and divided by 2 was 1, and then we finished. Okay. So, and you can run it if you're reading in a value. Okay. So that's the game. Okay. I'm not establishing anything about it. It's just an excuse to write a bash script. Here's my second. Instead of like writing out now that they've played with my first version of my program, I'm just going to sort of rerun it, but just sort of clean up the output. So I'm commented out these very wordy, that it was even, divide by 2, and then I'm just going to sort of like an arrow. This number leads to that number, leads to the other number. Let me point out some bashy type things. I'm echoing out the number. The minus n here means that I don't want a new line. So all the number, this sort of chain of numbers is going to all appear on the same line, except with some wrapping. Sometimes there's a long sequence of numbers before we finally get to 1. So that's mostly the same. Just, I'm going to make the output look a little bit different. Commented out the wordy parts here. I mean, the calculation part, the while is still the same. commented out these wordy echoes and put in a more sort of succinct echo. And then I put in an echo at the end to sort of actually display the one. I got to the one, yay. So this is Collets 2. So let me do a clear. And let me bash Collets 2. And I'm gonna, well, let me do the 777 again. So here's some sequence of numbers, not too bad. So 777 was odd. We multiplied by 3 and added 1. Then that was even, so we divided. So that was even, and we divided. Then that was odd, and we multiplied by 3 and added 1, and so on. That is the game. And so that is version 2, not much different from the original version, except I make the output sort of, now that you know the rules, then we can sort of make the output more succinct, and you can sort of see what's going on. And it's just, again, just an excuse to play with loops in Bash and remind some people of some things about Bash. That's my real reason. And now here I'm going to do version 3, and I'm going to have a nested loop. I'm going to have, I took my while loop, basically the program I just had. What was I doing in the previous program? Both of them. I was reading in a number and then sort of going through this sequence of steps for that number. And then what I've done is take that sequencing of steps, and that is the while loop, because I don't know how long I'm going to be in it. So that's a natural in programming. When you don't know how long you'll be in a loop, you use a while. But I stick that while loop in a for loop. So I'm going to, instead of asking the user, what number do you want me to do, I'm going to do the numbers from 1 to 100. So here's this for loop. So for n, some variable so n's going to get, so there's the sequence of numbers from 1 to 100, n is going to take on those numbers. And then I'm going to play the game with the while loop to do the Collets thing. And then when I'm out of the while loop, and I was printing before, I was printing a 1. Now I've added a -e to my echo to allow escape sequences. Again, my excuse is to do some bash scripting. So if I have the -e in my echo, that allows escape sequences. And so after I get to 1, I'm going to have some new lines here. So the -n up here meant no new line. So all this n arrow stuff ends up on the same line. But then when I get down here to the 1, then I wanted some space so I could tell, if 2 long sequences occurred back to back or something like that, I could tell one from the other. Okay, so this is version 3. And this is doing that Collets thing 100 times. So it's really going to sort of fill the page, but we'll see what it looks like at the end. Okay, and so here's what we've got. So we've got, you see here like 95, 96, 97, and we go the sequence until it gets to 1. The 96 was a pretty short sequence. The 97 was sort of long. So here's this skipping of lines between. So I have 88, 89, 90, and with the skipping of the lines in between. So I have the for loop and then the while loop in there. And there are different ways to work with a for loop. This is one. This is where you sort of create some sequence, and then n takes the values of the sequence. There's more traditional C style for loop. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to show you, just an excuse to do some bash scripting. Thanks for